Actually, let's do this first. Let's kind of summarize this whole process. So with step one, we're going to write the standard maximization problem into standard form. Then we're going to introduce our slack variables. And then the objective function equation is going to be taken into consideration and make it equal to zero. And that's going to give us our initial system. And then from that, we can write our initial tableau. So once we get to this point here at the initial tableau, that's when the simplex method really starts. So next thing, are there any negative indicators in the bottom row? Well, if we are at the start, this should be a yes. And then what we do is, okay, well, now let's select the pivot column, which one is the largest negative one. Now, are there any positive elements in the pivot column above the dashed line? Well, hopefully yes, if it's a normal problem. Then we're going to select the pivot element and perform the pivot operation. So all the, what we did before, these things, the pivot operation. We're going to do all those. So we're going to make that a one, those zeros, and that's going to be our pivot operation where the x2, or yeah, x2 comes in here, and then this one exits. And so that's kind of that pivot operation. So now we're going to come up here. Now, are there any negatives? Well, if they're no, then stop, the optimal solution has been found. But if yes, you go through this again. Now, here's a key point. If there's any no positive elements or anything, then we basically have to stop, and then there's no optimal solution. So those are the two possible things. Stop, and we have an optimal solution, or stop, there is no optimal solution. So those are the two places where we get a stop. And so I think what we need to do is probably we'll have some more problems where we have both of them, and they'll hopefully make it so you understand how that works. So let's do this one, and we're going to kind of do it from scratch. This is the problem they'll give us. And so what we need to do is we need to kind of add our slack variables, get our E system, and also get our initial system. And then from there, what we can do is write our initial tableau. So I'm going to kind of do all those in one step. So I'm going to say, okay, well, let's go to our initial system. So here we'll have a 5x1 plus x2 plus s1 equals 9. And I'm not going to leave spaces just for sake of space here. So then x1 plus x2 plus s2 equals 5. Now I'm going to take everything here to the other side. So I'm going to have a minus 2x1 minus x2, and then it's going to be plus p equals 0. And then I have x1, x2, s1, s2 are greater than or equal to 0. Okay. So those are going to be my initial kind of equations, and then I can make my initial tableau from that. My initial tableau is going to be S1, S2, P, and my dotted lines. And then I'll have X1, X2, S1, S2, P, and then my solid line. And so now I just have to write the numbers in accordingly. So it's going to be 5x1 and then plus x2, so it's a 1, and there's one of those, none of those, none of those, and that's going to be a 9. And then S2, so that's going to be one of those, 0 of those, one of those, 0 of those, 5 of those. And then my bottom row is going to be a minus 2, a minus 1, and a 0, a 0, a 1, and a 0. Okay, so that gives me my initial tableau. Now from there, I need to find which one is the most negative. Well, the most negative is going to be what? This one. It's the biggest negative. And so now I'm going to find the quotients to find out which row. All right, so now I'm going to take the 9 divided by, and it looks like a 5 here. And so that's 9/5. I'm just going to leave that as 9/5. And then I'm going to take 5 divided by 1. Well, that's just 5. Well, this is smaller than this one, so that's going to be my row. And so this is going to enter, and this one is going to exit, and this is going to be my pivot element. Okay. So what I need to do then is make this a 1 and those to be 0. So let's make a new color. Let's call this one, let's say we're going to take 1/5 of row 1, and that's our new row 1. So that will make that a 1. And then I need to take and say, okay, well, if I take a negative 1/5 of that plus that, that'll make that a 0. So let's take a negative 1/5 row 1 plus row 2. That's my new row 2. And I need a negative 2 here. So if I take 2/5, because that's a negative already, I don't need to take a negative of it. A 2/5 row 1 plus row 3, That can be my new row 3. All right, so those are the three operations I'm going to do to make this a 1 and those two to be 0. So now let's write our new thing. So now I have x1 at the top and then s2 and then p, and then I'll have x1, x2, s1, s2, p, and that. All right. So now I'm just taking 1/5 of the first row there. So what do I have? Well, I've got a 1 here, and then I've got a 1/5, a 1/5, 0, a 0, and a 9/5. Now I'm taking a negative 1/5 of that plus that. So if I think about this as a negative that plus that, that's going to be what? A 0. And that's going to be 4/5. And then that's going to be negative 1/5. And then that's going to be a 1. That's going to be a 0. And that's going to be 5, 3, 29. Looks like 16/5. And now I'm taking a 2/5 times that. So it would basically be a 2 minus 2. That's going to be 0. And that's going to be 2/5 minus 1. So that's going to be minus 3/5. And that's going to be a 2/5. That's going to be a 0. That's going to be a 1. And 2/5, that's going to be what? 18/5. Okay. So now we've got that. Now we've got our first pivot done. Now we have to find the next point has this greatest negative. So that's going to be this one. And so now we'll take for the quotient, we're going to take 9/5. And if we take that times the reciprocal 5/1, we get what? 9. And here we have 16/5 times the reciprocal of this is going to be 5/4. And so that's going to be what? 4. And so 4 is the smallest. And so that means that's going to be our pivot element. This row is going to enter, and or that column rather, and this row is going to exit. Okay. All right, so now let's change colors again. So now we need to make this one 1. So let's take and do 5/4. Row 2 goes to row 2. If we take let's see, 1/4, a negative 1/4, row 2 plus row 1, that could be our new row 1. And we need a 3 here, so if we take a 3/4, row 2 plus row 3, that could be our new row 3. All right, so this will be a 0, that'll be a 1. It's going to be what? That's going to be a negative 1/4. Oh, wait, yeah, 5/4. Yeah, so it's going to be a negative 1/4. That's going to be a 5/4 is 0. Let's flip that over. That's going to be 4. Okay. And so let's just go ahead and write it down. So I think I have that written here. So we have x1. Let's put it in purple again. So we have x1, x2, s1, s2, p. And then we had entering, we had them now. That was going to be x1, that was x2, that's p. My brilliantly drawn straight line there. And so when we did that, that was going to be a 0, a 1, negative 1/4. That was 5/4. That was 0. That was 4. And so then we're taking 5/4 times this row, 1 negative 1/4 of this row plus that row. So we'll have a 1. That'd be a 0. That'll be a 1/4. That'll be a negative 1/4. That'll be a 0. And it's going to be just a 1. Okay, so that will give me, I had a 1, a 0, a 1/4, a negative 1/4, a 0, and a 1. And then the bottom one, that better be 0, 0. And then that one was going to be 3/4 times that. So that was going to be that plus that should be 1/4. That should be a 3/4, a 1. And that's going to be 4. So that's going to be a 6. So that's going to give me a 1/4, a 3/4, a 1, and a 6. Now, my indicators are all positive, so that means we can stop. Okay. And when we stop, that means our final answer. So the max P is equal to 6. And here we're going to say when x1 is equal to what? Well, x1 is going to be equal to 1, and x2 is equal to what? 4. Okay. And then our S1 and S2 are equal to 0. So that's going to be kind of all they probably are going to ask for most of the time is what is your max P, what is your X1, and what is your X2. All right, so let's stop there and we'll come back for another one.